Hi, everybody. Steve Carl again. Um, I think now we're in week 11 of the Sunday poetry reading series. It's a very humid day in Honolulu. It's been sunny all day, and then it just opened up about 10 minutes ago and started raining like crazy. So um, if I start glistening, that's what the problem is. um, So yeah, it's been a crazy week, of course, and another crazy week. So hoping to take a little break here and refresh ourselves before we see what civilization-threatening crisis envelops us next week. So today I'm going to read work that I wrote in 1996. But that never got gathered up into a collection. Some of these pieces were published in various magazines, which I'll note as we get to them. And I'm going to start by reading a short piece on poetics that I wrote for the Sub-Poetics email list that I was on at the time. So it's kind of it's a little off the cuff. It's not completely polished or anything, but so I'll start with that. It's called A Few Stray Poetics, or The Perpendicular Tradition. On our planet, the beholding of an other sets up a field of meaning in which words are the residue left behind by things passing between. Actually, the things themselves may only be coagulations of bits of the field that become solid. I have in mind human history as a history of ego consciousness, which flickers into existence with the solidification of language and its shade representation, coming to sustain itself for longer and longer periods, developing the ability to contain denser and denser abstractions, and finally creating diversions which fragment the thread of attention, which may eventually lead to the breakdown and disappearance of ego consciousness. In such an atmosphere, there is increasing pressure upon consciousness not to engage in meditative thought, to shrink back from feeling things deeply, to expend its time and energy in pursuit of things other than original bliss. Writing has the ability to act as a catalyst within consciousness, helping us remember where spaces of mindfulness, passion and compassion, and rapture are located in us. This may happen spontaneously or be the result of receptive, attentive reading or listening. The attempt of praxis for me is to bring into focus writing trails, which might lead or seem to show traces of the moment of clarity, when the connections between all things and their source become clear. Cummings, to liberate the actual crisp organic squirm, the is. Of course, these moments of clarity are just that, momentary. So even though the potential is always there for profound shifts of consciousness within both writer and reader, at any given moment, I have no idea whether any of this is actually happening or whether it's a really convincing representation. However, as a continuing practice of meditation on being and language, and as Heidegger says, language is the language of being, as clouds are the clouds of the sky. What matters is the journey along the path. Coming soon, a polemics. Not really, that never happened. This is called a mutant pantoum. I think we discussed pantoum a few weeks ago when I read one. It's a Malayan poetic form where the second and fourth lines of one stanza, they're 4-line stanzas, become the first and third lines of the next stanza, or maybe maybe it's the other way around. I actually keep getting that confused. But anyway, I took most of the lines for this poem from an old book that I found. It was published in 1906 or something, and it was this old textbook, and it had these great old school kid rhyme, ideas in them, like the ideas that they thought school kids in 1906 could handle. And they were really funny. So, but it's called a Mutant Pantoum because I didn't keep the lines in a standard pantoum. The lines are the same, and in this one I took the lines and most of them. I didn't do this with all of them, but most of them I actually changed the line into something that sounds similar but uses significantly different words. The second time the line recurs, so each line is mutated for its second appearance. And it has an epigram from the book. A servant of Sir Walter Raleigh one day saw clouds of smoke rising around his master's head. Startled at the sight, he dashed the contents of a tankard over Raleigh and ran screaming for help. Often one man is castigated for all his era's miscues. On the southeast, the thick, blunt mass of the Yucatan Peninsula. The patient sand swallowed up Ulysses, darkness which prevails when the greater depths are reached. On his soul's ease, the thick blunderbuss of ogres stamped him insular, made in superb disregard of America. Darkness which prevails when a greater debt's released. They feel they have something to lose through bad government. A maiden's determined secrecy in an amorous ice age. If you seek a beautiful peninsula, look about you, say the Michiganians. They fell. They've held something too loose to breed good intent. The workers were forbidden to carry their secrets to foreign lands. It's a freaking beautiful peninsula. Lacquered boundaries, say the Michiganians. By the way, I realize that that's not the proper word for people from Michigan. It's actually Michiganders, but I used it because it sounded funnier in this context. So sorry, Michiganders. Thousands of elvers swim into the rivers. The workers were bidden to miscarry secrets to far-off lands. European nations resented this treatment, but not to the point of giving up trade. Thousands of elf spawn clamber upriver. The Navy trains thousands of expert bakers and cooks to feed its hungry sailors. European nations are recent treatments, appointed and given up in trade. You place your insurance primarily on the family breadwinner. The Navy trains thousands of expert bakers and cooks to feed its hungry sailors. The purpose of education is to build up the basic habits. You place your insurance primarily on the family breadwinner. He evaluates what he reads, and his discussions are refreshing. The purpose of education is to pile on the basic habits, but nothing can withstand the terrible driver ants. He invalidates what he reads, and his discussion is invective. Care in using this stitch means time well spent. Naught but can, wizened treble by writhing rants. After one, many capitulate, for all their errors excused. Karen, using this stitch means time's wills spent. The patient strand strangles Odysseus. This one is called Poem Seen Forming in the Sky Between Two Telephone Poles. Fast raspberries detail temporal fens. Absolution, half digested, cowers akimbo and mental. Attractive volcano withdraws and stands opalescent. Losing fear crests any epitome for walls to adjust younger family frailty of resistance. In spite of all the harrowings, remember it's not the blast, it's the rims. Alignments. The sum where the last madman laughs attaches poverty to power. It writes rhythmic arithmetics against any wren wherein instinct stays instanter. Took turns elevating each other, and we developed clocks of speech breaching formula's fabrics. Continued minute to tuck struggle under the stones of structure. Vast workshop of kindred crenellations. My status abstracted and dandy, blue calliope of suck-up, the rented habit embossed on either organ. Convolve. 1. There's one possible duress that awaits you at the border, that between being fantasy and something really revealing. The time's in need of a good obituarist. Listen, the abyss isn't exactly a machine. It's a green thing, too folded up intraventricular, but it's overgrown your privacy and can't be transplanted in this winter. Now it worries the capillaries, i.e. a bridge you float out to waiting humanity. And that's no abstraction. No nexus of verbs is ever, is forever. On the other hand, this whole string of characters is as much as a comet's tail, looking like a blurry star leaving itself behind everywhere, an aurora forever orienting itself to what seems brightest and nearest, creates a trip for itself and goes off on it, a big ball of dirty ice in a handkerchief on a stick. 2. The soul has also its white noise, from immersion with instants, convulses on horizons into sense. Think of the migraine alertness of the Sartreans, seeding to sewers whatever made sail, what can't leverage entiring seas, meaning, twisting the landscape of communica out of its jams, concentration erupted, trying to cross the tracks laid by a history of human relations so thorough in its precise expulsion of the unspeakable soul. Oblique. A creative leak in the reactive dawn tap. Though I am not the apple of this morning's eye, I'll cradle as best whatever stillborn light drips up, as what sickly can squeeze translucence up this spine straight, can manage these passages. This is another poem that was written while watching a movie, inspired by that movie. This one is a Jim Jarmusch film starring in, with a Neil Young soundtrack. It's called Dead Man. The train, not exactly washing over the alien landscape. Later, a native village in a bloodletting will echo back to a shrunken hell, barely lit now, narrowly past, opening to succeeding worlds, tents of seed skies, and all but this last might be popped at any time by tinier imaginaries. Liberty Rising. A robust report plunge grows a cell to be its final sign. The federal figure flooded with the creation, bond of a generation. A hail is a push, a surprising cause to prompt an early return. But its lopsided overreaction is raising a harbinger, jumping buoyant abbreviants as these seasonally adjusted waves increase ground. Raise high the point place, Tao. Language the Onto way. One thing breaking sheer questions. What is whole soon forces a lacking in order. The stanza, however, endows thoughtful content. The unrest of thought speaks in sheer poem. 6 enchanted things enter strangely final reflection. Words need first to mean veiled food, only we hesitate and line willfulness with a colon. Power hardly tempted the missing experiences. The whole enchanted disposal reads created. I published that one in Antonym, the magazine that I published that dealt with ontological concerns, which is what Antonym was dealing with. Break to the epic blank of personhood, the hoodlum desire disintegrating Goliath into a Durasis of David's. Here I huddle, opaque, when the eyes turned in. The street changed it all. Swim in entity, possible sometime. Tell me, O logical endpoint. Contract ablution with design, to push an urge until it's trans. Compile another and glaze. The next 2 poems are collaborative poems that I wrote with one of my favorite poets, guy who lives in San Francisco or near San Francisco, George Albon. He's a great poet. He was a wonderful friend. I haven't had any contact with him for a while because he doesn't spend that much time on Facebook. So unfortunately, I've kind of lost touch with him, but when I lived in San Francisco, I used to go and hang out with George every so often. We would go to a literary event or something or other, and then we would go sit in a cafe for a little while and write poems together. So collaboration between poets is, my experience has found it to be kind of a tricky thing. It's usually fun to do, but the product is not often something that you want to rush out and publish. But when I wrote poems with George, it was different. For some reason, our voices meshed really well, and I was so happy with the way these poems came out that I asked if he would mind if I submitted them to a magazine that I was planning on sending some work to. And he said it was fine, and so these 2 poems were published in an online magazine called Juxta Electronic, number 16. So, and I have a hard time, since these are typed now and you can't see our handwriting, I have a hard time in a lot of cases remembering which of us wrote which line. So that's how either that's how poor my memory is, or that's how well our voices meshed when we wrote this, or maybe a combination of the two. So, so the first one is called After Difficulty. There is a now that is feigning wing-break, and that is harmony. When to be blind and make sense of the moving mediums, the walnuts stabilized in the rising dough, an aporia augmented by a lacuna. When we mention hitting the wall, it's a term of what's been captured, green words moving across a black band, moored there indefinably but marked with meticulous attention. And in the end, the cash you make begins to make sense of you. I was thinking, in Grecian weather, the open is the home, and drawing the nod forward like moonstones. It was cold. People looked out at us like we were brave. You wouldn't know us. We're not famous. But gaining volume in the background, the combine pushed over into pure flurries of security. Openless, we finally noticed. Something like a circus had been there, though something else. Banners only referred to their colors. A discipline of tongues set free and set aside in the same motion. It was the year of our babbling. What we meant only brought up out of manner. To make sense of the long curb, it was chess. Mercy out of politeness, witnesses gathering at the gate. The table rocked like a rock. Our end narrowed to the sustaining plot of the ground we'd seen there. The world is for us to enjoy. That's what it's for. Dream seminars are easy, like layers of comfort and awareness, while the usurper's words lie buried in their throats. The attractive heart pulls in space for the spark word's return. Burnt visions are the price of cramped quarters, but there you are above your shadow. There are tutors of the verge, yet seeking you, you must hear. The other one's called On the Corner, which is a reference to a Miles Davis album. As will become clear, Miles actually makes an appearance in the poem too. So On the Corner was flowers in bin, a clash-like jangle, just others passing, their being busy in your spectrum. Sighting down a captured corridor or a merely angling growth from myopia, the turning face holds its quorum of aspects. If you walk a red light, is the transgression question of speed or sight? Example of pant leg pushed by the wind, commission, enthusiasm, captivity. This, then, is a late embrasure of motive periphery, how it stands with, always just around and neatly clipped by our limits, the rounding of it. People will wait, an uncertain moment in two-door history. Shaking a can was indeed the recent symbol, but ellipsis might relapse toward mere need. A way in which sound is lofted across and settles itself in a moment, hewed to an opener position and tremoring through foundation to the closer corners we were propped against. A bunch stood and collected their mood, sign, motley cartoon, passed over, lost in advance. "You got the blow?" Miles Davis said that, setting aside all nakedness and the lateness of hours. It's our gatherings at hand, intangible wind, seen evidence of a behind to the season you've peered at through glass or glasses. Then the neon came on, holidays in summer. The lilac phase had passed, blue deepening. We could have gone, but we spaced. We're the light that fades. Chet Baker said that, pacing a phrase to follow up with starlight, its lifted vault a liquid chirrup. A displacement in ceiling is drawing out the rootedness and murmur of speech. Bulbs played, tires load on paving. Whoops. This one's called Weed Swimming. This one's just me. To date, the only fate has been my own, trinitary one, by dint of an architecture of pause, the implicit pace and linger of a human curve that pops serenity and leaves us gurgling after anybody's guess whose garden. Or to start in elsewhere, what are you doing the rest of my life? To be a human life, how weird. What could we have been thinking? We are still not. The cattle act indifferent to the butcher, perhaps conceiving of hamburgers as revenge. It's a prequel to Hamburger. When I say a broken sun, I can only mean the line of sight is broken, or a fiction of science. I come to life in a field of perceptual distortion, a whiff of spirit drowned in orange syrup. There's a loose focus to be engaged. Autumn sperm blossoms would pass into loam and make a second leap. With summer's coming, it concedes its tonal vision. Another inside turned to airy surface, trimmed with a purposeful frequency, peopled. This one is called Poem Beginning with a Line of Prose. The line of prose is by Robert Glück, another great San Francisco writer. If I remember correctly, and I may not, I think this was given to me as an assignment by my friend Darren, who was publishing a magazine at the time. I don't have any record of being published in his magazine, though, so I could be wrong about that. The summer's broad emptiness dwarfed the invented world. Its late intensities were paraphrased in the sky trails above the meadow. Dreaming of this life in this house, the rain engraves it in its place like gravity. Years of hopeless roaming in the realm of what is most near. This land a Creoled crucible with ashes scattered, bereft. That which happened, the essential aside, a turning capped in Winter Street, the confluence of intimacy and aggression. All youths retire to Captain Healy's idiom, there to rest in its red and bodily distinct forms. I'm spilling over, attendant to topography, a slow surface performed for fashion. An evermind, as ever, mind breathes out the musics, humming hoverbirds, lowing thalia, know a laugh to hear one here in the horn's verges. Each single touch a note as expressive as you can make it. A sound spills off the table into the desert afternoon, leaving the fog in place. Are the sightlines between clear to you at least? Or what else? This essence world, as soft and tropical, while this one's world swirls with dissonance, sometimes breaking through. Mush terminal mystic broken appropriate. At the border, which land is a should? Recount the careful moment the minutes returned. Follow so well it's your lead. My desire is to slip inside you as sensorial, like scent or melody or a tingling, to balance paralyses. And then the last piece was published on a website, poetry website called Deluxe Rubber Chicken. It was written when I visited New York in the fall of 1996. Um, it's written in a voice borrowed from Jack Kerouac. When I was working in a record store in 1990, we got the Rhino Records published a box set, 3 or 4 CD set of Jack Kerouac recordings. And I listened to that a whole bunch of times, and I love the cadence of Kerouac's voice. And even though I probably hadn't listened to that collection in a few years when I wrote this poem, I just remembered how Kerouac's voice sounded. And so when I looked up after coming from foggy San Francisco into New York, where you could see the moon in the sky, I wrote this poem about the moon. It's called New Jack York. Finally, a city where the moon isn't made of cold gelatinous gravy. In New York, it's a big spotted hillbilly's tooth, goofing up the sky's smile. And when you howl at it, it only comes back with big bodhisattva chuckle. Yuck. That's the poetry. Thank you. So this week's question is from Dan. What was it that initially drew you to poetry as opposed to another written form? I'm not sure in terms of what drew me to poetry as opposed to another written form. The reason that I started writing poetry was because I couldn't play an instrument. I was in love with the Beatles, and I had recently gotten interested in Bob Dylan, and I just loved what they were doing with the lyrics, and I wanted to write songs actually, but I couldn't write songs very well because I couldn't play an instrument. So I kind of moved over into writing poems that didn't require an instrument and had their own internal music that was. You could make it more, less regular than a musical structure. You could kind of let the internal rhythm and beat of the words do the cadence for you. So. Yeah, in terms of reading poetry, I'm not sure why I wasn't necessarily more interested in reading poetry than in other things, but I like just the compactness and the flow and the associative richness of a poem as opposed to lines of prose that seem more linear and can still have associative interplay and stuff, but are less intense. They're more sort of threaded out than poems usually are. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. And I think that's all for this week. So everybody take care. Be good to yourself. Be good to everyone else. And we'll see you back next week. All right. Bye.